Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to our first of what will be 3 Alice Community Nights here for Kenosha Unified School District. My name is Scott Keno. I'm one of our regional coordinators for school leadership and learning for the elementary. I'm joined tonight by Mr. Brian Geiger, who's also a regional coordinator for secondary schools, and Mr. Pat Finnemore, our director of facilities. Appreciate y'all coming tonight. We've got a lot of information for you. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that we do have a lot of information. So on the way in, we do have water, in case that is a need for you, but you also see a number of note cards in the back of the room and a bucket of pens. Tonight's presentation is informative. We are trying to relay information to you tonight, making you more prepared and more knowledgeable about what we're doing in Kenosha Unified School District. But we understand that you will have questions. If you have questions or comments or would like someone to reach out to you, please fill out a note card, write whatever you feel you need to write on there. Make sure you put your name, your email, or your phone number, whichever you prefer, and then leave that in the little mini basket in the back there, and we'll collect those at the end of the evening, and someone will follow up with you. I also want to make sure you're aware that we do have one of our school resource officers, Arturo Gonzalez. Appreciate you being with us tonight. And so let's get started. So obviously we have a lot going on in the world around us related to school violence, and we all have questions. We all have a lot on our minds, and I gather that's why we're joined here tonight, and we have so many of you here. We appreciate that. The biggest question that you have, I'm sure, on your mind is, what is Kenosha Unified School District doing to make sure that our students are safe in our schools? Please understand that there are many different opinions out there about what we should be doing or what could be done. Tonight's purpose is not to discuss those. We're not here to find those answers. I just want to remind you, our purpose here tonight is to inform you about what we're doing as a district in terms of our ALICE lesson plans, the related curriculum, and things directly related to ALICE. So just once again, if you have questions or want someone to reach out to you, please make sure you fill out a note card, and we will be sure to get in touch with you. Some of the other things you're going to hear about, some of the technology related to our system. We've got some major advances in our district that we're very proud of. And you're going to hear about those from different folks here tonight. I mentioned the note cards, and we'll be following up with those. All right. With that, let's get started. Welcome Pat Finnemore, and he'll get us right into ALICE.
Indeed. Boom. Good evening. What we're going to do, I think our first slide says, go to the next one, Scott. I think our first slide says, why should we prepare our staff and students? I don't think there's anybody in this room who doubts the need to do this. However, we're going to talk a little bit about what ALICE is, because we're not sure, if everybody, understands the protocol. And when we talk about what ALICE is, we're going to talk also, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got to ALICE, why we made the decision to use ALICE as our response to an active threat, and a little bit of history of kind of where we were and how we got here. And so with that, so the slide says, why prepare our staff and students? And there's been obviously a lot of studies done on active school shooting incidences. In the last 25 years, those studies have shown that the average response time by a police department to a school shooting is 5 to 6 minutes. Now, we live in the city of Kenosha, Village of Pleasant Prairie, village or town of Summers. We have maybe a little bit larger, a little bit more dense area. And so our response times here in the Kenosha Unified boundaries are probably more on the order of 3 to 4 minutes if you would talk to any of the law enforcement agencies that serve us. But on average, about 5 to 6 minutes nationally. And during that time, within that time, 60% of all school shooting events are over within 5 minutes. And so when we talk about why did we need to do something in our schools, why did we need to train our staff, our students, is because more often than not, the event's over before the police can show up and do something about it. And so we have to be prepared. Scott? Okay, we got a couple slides here, and it's just data. This first one is about a 20-year period from, I think it's 1993 to 2000, or 1992 to 2013. And this slide just shows graphically school shooting events in the United States. The yellow dots represent shooting events that had casualties but had one or fewer fatalities. The red dots indicate school shooting events that had multiple fatalities. So, you can see, a lot of events in many areas across our country. This slide I like. Scott put this one together for me. It kind of shows what I think we all know, that the number of these events continues to increase. So in the 1800s, a 100-year period, there were 37 school shooting events. In the first half of the 1900s, there were 61, so there was a definite increase in that period. The last 50 years of the 1900s, we jumped to 166. And here in the last 18 years, we've had 210. And we're going to talk a little bit about certain things that may have led to that. But what I want to talk about here in the next few minutes is some of what we would call the most significant, in a very negative way, school shooting events that have happened in our country. So the first one I just want to talk a little bit about is Columbine. I'm sure we all remember Columbine High School, Littleton, Colorado, April of 1999. Two killers. They killed 12 students and a staff member. They wounded, I think, about 21 others. And tremendously studied and evaluated event. And yet, in my mind, and I think in the mind of everybody here in Kenosha Unified, nothing really changed at the school level nationally. We didn't really learn from Columbine. The police did. Law enforcement made major changes after Columbine. Back in that time frame, if you had an active shooter, an active threat event in any sort of building, the response by law enforcement was to get the strategic SWAT-type task force there and enter en masse to deal with both addressing the casualties and to address the threat. That was a huge lesson learned after Columbine. The change took place almost immediately, that the first responding officers are going in, and they're going in to deal with that threat. And we're all the better because of that. But from a school perspective, even though this thing was studied immensely, very little changed. Some technology was introduced, more cameras in schools, card access kind of things. We made one big change at Unified. We started locking our doors. Prior to Columbine, I believe that every school in the country kept their doors unlocked. We're a public building. Parents are invited to come in. It's you're paying taxes. You want to come to the schools. You come to the schools. We made a change, as did probably about 10 to 15% of the school districts in the country. But most of them didn't. Most school districts remained open, and they remained open for a long time. The next event that I think was, a huge event as far as affecting things, although we didn't recognize it right away there either, was in April of 2007, Virginia Tech University. 32 people were killed, 17 were wounded. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about Virginia Tech in a little bit, so we're going to kind of come back to that. One killer. Sandy Hook, December of 2012, 20 students, 6 and 7 years old, all first graders, executed by one person, 6 adults, all staff members in the school, 26 people total were killed in about 6 minutes. And that, I think, shook everybody to their core, and in the weeks after Sandy Hook, we were inundated with, phone calls from school districts across the country. By then, we had cameras all over the place, and we had card access, and we had been locking our doors for about 12 years. And I think within a year after Sandy Hook, those 85% of the schools in the country, probably about 2/3 of them, started locking their doors at least, and started looking at what can we do different. And we were no different. Within about 6 months after Sandy Hook, the reports, the studies started to come out. What are the lessons learned? And the first one that, the first thing that I think we all, it was in the back of my head. I think it was probably in the back, Arturo, it was probably in the back ahead of every police officer is, this lockdown in place, this passive response to an active threat. Does that really make sense? Just to give a little context here, a lockdown was chosen to be the response to an active threat, or not to an active threat. A lockdown was chosen to be the response to a gun near a school in the 70s. And it was done, I think the starting point was the Los Angeles School District. They were experiencing a lot of drive-by gang-related incidents at schools. And so it was a very logical response. There's somebody driving by the school with guns. Let's turn off the lights, let's get down low, let's huddle up and let's stay below the windows, and a very logical response. Somehow that became nationally, worldwide, the response to any sort of gun threat at a school was what we call a lockdown, a passive lockdown. That's what happened at Sandy Hook. That's what they did. Those students, the teachers locked the door, turned off the lights, the students all huddled up in a tight group, and then this person came in and shot and killed them all. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that I think was eye-opening out of Sandy Hook was some of the studies that said, you know what? Let's look back at Virginia Tech. I'd swear, when Virginia Tech happened, I read everything I could get my hands on that thing, and it was, the volumes of information that came out of it. And there was so much about the killer and his life, all of his problems that he had, and the things that the school, the university should have done differently. There was very little about what actually happened in Norris Hall that day and how people responded. So there were warning signs, and I want to talk a little bit about those because that kind of leads into a little bit about what Scott's going to talk about later on. So there were some warning signs, not some, there were a lot of warning signs with this particular killer. Not much different than the warning signs that we've heard and read about with respect to the killer in Parkland, Florida. This young man had emotional problems, recognized as early as middle school, certainly throughout high school, went to the college, had claims made that he was stalking women on campus. And that semester, early on in that semester, he had to write a paper and present it orally in front of his class. His paper, his presentation was so disturbing that a number of students in the class dropped out of the class. The teacher, the professor, was disturbed, and she went to the department head and relayed, hey, there's some weird stuff that this guy was talking about, And I don't know what really happened after that with that. About a month or so before the shooting, he went to a shooting range, and I think you're all kind of familiar if you've seen him on TV. You go to a shooting range and you're on one end and there's a target on the other end and you're shooting for accuracy. Well, he went to this shooting range and he asked the shooting range operator if he could take the targets and lay them on the ground and shoot at them. And the operator thought that was kind of weird, but said, whatever. And so he did. So this guy went, and he took his gun and he shot these things on the ground. And he was practicing what he knew he was going to do later on at that school. Again, nothing was reported. Just a couple days before the event, he was seen by students with chains and locks, practicing locking doors of buildings on campus, I'm guessing to make sure his chains were long enough. Again, nobody said anything. So then that morning, he killed 2 people in a dorm. He made his way to Norris Hall, which is a little depiction of the second floor of Norris Hall. Put his chains and locks on the door handles, went in another building that connected to Norris Hall, entered that building. He also put a bomb threat by one of the doors where he put his chains and locks. A custodian saw that, went to report it to administration. During that time frame, the killing started. So just to kind of take you through things, he started out in room 206, that's the top middle room. This was reported by students in some of the rooms. They saw him peeking in through the windows of the rooms, walking in, looking, walking through the hallway, looking in, and which, some of the students who reported this after the fact said that seemed weird. We're already in April. We're 3 or 4 months into a semester. Usually aren't lost trying to find your classroom by then. I think he was trying to figure out where the best targets might be. He went into room 206 and started shooting. He killed the majority, 10 students in that room, teacher and 9 students, wounded a couple of others, and a couple weren't hit. And then he went across the hall to room 207 and started to do the same thing. In room 207, there was a student, I believe his name was Matthew Laporte. He was an Air Force ROTC cadet. His response was, "I'm going to do something about it," when this kid came in the room with the gun. And so he charged at him, and he was shot and killed. And we're going to talk a little bit about counters. Brian is in a little bit, and had maybe some others done something while Matthew was going at him, that event might have ended right there, but it didn't. He then went to room 201. Same thing. They were in passive lockdown. The door was locked. They were huddled up on the floor. He killed the majority, 12 people in that room. Then he went to room 204. Room 204 was taught by a Professor Lebrescu. He was a Holocaust survivor. He heard that gunfire, and his natural response was, "Get out of this room." And so he used his body to barricade the door of his room and instructed his students to go out the window. Second floor, these are college students, they're a little bit older than our students. Second floor, the gunman shot through that door multiple times, killed Professor Lebrescu, eventually got into the room. However, 14 people escaped completely safely. 3 others did escape out the window. They did suffer some injuries. One other student, a female student, did die. No one knows if she just was the last one to get out, or she, didn't want to jump out the window or whatever. Then he moved to room 205. Every student and the professor in room 205, none of them can say who or why or what, but they made the decision to barricade their door. They took a table that was wider than the door. They pushed that table across the door, and they had students on each side of the table, not directly in front of the door, and they pushed that up there. He shot through that door dozens of times. He'd never got in that room. All 12 people in that room survived. He went back to room 207. There were 8 survivors left in that room. They also don't know why, but by the time he came back, they had decided to barricade that door, and those 8 folks ended up living. A teacher from the 3rd floor had come down, had heard the noise, instructed his students to stay in their room, locked in their room, and he went down to investigate. He was shot and killed in the hallway, and then the killer went back into room 211, and then he killed himself. What could we have learned in 2007? We could have learned right then and there that let's do something more than a passive lockdown. And so that's what happened after Sandy Hook, and we can go to the next slide, Scott. Department of Education and a whole lot of other people. We got another slide that says New York Police Department, but there were a lot of organizations after Sandy Hook that said, you know what, a passive lockdown is not an adequate response to a school shooting event. And so in Kenosha, when that report came out, that first one that we showed, when that report came out, we convened, our safety committee got together. We can go to the 2 slides from there, Scott. Our safety committee, which had representatives from these organizations, the Kenosha Police Department, the Pleasant Prairie Police Department, the Kenosha County Sheriffs, and the Kenosha Fire Department, as well as the Village of Pleasant Prairie Fire Department. and staff from KUSD, we got together and we said, we need to do something different. These organizations are telling us we need to do something different. We all know we need to do something different. And 2 of our school resource officers had that summer, went to a school safety seminar down, I think it was in Florida, and they said, at this meeting in May of 2013, they said, you know what? There was this one session, it was an introductory session, but it was this thing called ALICE, and we should really look at it. And so we did. And what is ALICE? So let's talk a little bit about what ALICE is. It is nationwide. There are people using ALICE in all 50 states. There's over 1 million people trained, and I bet you there's more than that by now. Over 3,000 police departments have trained their staffs on ALICE, and almost 4,000 school districts are using it. In addition, this is not just a school district thing. These are all different types of businesses and institutions that have employed ALICE. And the majority of this has all happened since Sandy Hook. I mean, that is really what drove this home for everybody. ALICE is an acronym. It stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. And we got Brian right here.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. So what Pat said is ALICE basically is not a linear sequential response. It can come in at any time. If we have an active shooter in our building, we could evacuate at that time if it's safe. The information, authorization, and proactive training are key to surviving an active threat. Okay?
So the A in ALICE stands for alert. I think another shortcoming with what we all had was if there was a threat in a school, the way that the word got out was through the main office, getting on the intercom and saying, hey, we're in a lockdown. Well, there have been plenty of incidences where the principal or the folks in the main office were the first people that the killer encountered, and they were not able to get that message out. And so what we did was we said, we've got to have a system that any staff member can initiate. It doesn't have to come from the office. If I'm a teacher in a classroom and I see somebody walking through the parking lot and looks very suspicious, maybe carrying something that looks like it might be, I have to have that ability to start this alert. And so what we did was we put in a system. It works off of our phone system. It's called Informacast. We're certainly not the only district that uses Informacast now. I think we were one of the first ones that did adopt it. It is a phenomenal system. It is what I like to call about as foolproof as it gets. We test it all the time in all the schools. Any staff member can initiate it, no different than a fire alarm. And that was, I don't know how many folks in here are staff members, but I mean, that was a little bit of a mindset change. I mean, it was, hey, lockdowns come from the office. Am I able to do this? I mean, this is going to put our school system into a kind of a state of panic. But absolutely, our instruction to our staff is, you see a concern, you alert. If you're wrong, that's okay. I'd rather be wrong than to be silent. The system alerts everybody in the school. It's automatic. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is initiate it. Everything else is automatic from there on out. It notifies everybody in the school. It also notifies our emergency response team, which includes people like us, superintendent, and others. It tells us, because we're not in the school and we have 40 buildings, it tells us what school, what room, what phone number, and it gives us a link to the cameras in that school. So I don't have to go searching, we tried to make it as simple for us to use as possible. And the only thing that it doesn't do is it cannot call 911. It can, the system can, but in Kenosha County, our 911 it doesn't take digital at this point in time. It's definitely something that they're working on. And when that does come into play, we'll be able to tie that right into the 911 call center. Biggest thing we talk about in alert is we want to get that message out right away, both to the school and to the people that can help the school out.
Yeah, and Patrick also stated earlier that the 911 center can take up to 3,000 phone calls.
I don't know how many. They're going to take them. They're going to take them as they get them. And so our feeling is, good point, Brian. if you have an event like this in a school, a lot of people are going to call 911, and the Kenosha County will tell you, bring it on. You know, that's their expectation. When we do our staff training, we bring up some of stuff from other events that have happened in the past. You know, there's some of the live 911 calls, you know, and you can listen to what happened in those events, and, you know, they're taking, you know, the same operator's taking multiple calls at the same time, so they can handle it.
Absolutely. So the first, the lockdown, the L in Alice is lockdown, okay? And so what we ask our teachers to do, and they practice this during the training, is they'll look in the hallway. The inform cast goes out. We're going into a lockdown. They look in the hallway, make sure they stop, look, listen, see what they see, they gather information, and then they lock that door. It's already locked, they just shut it. And then they put the barricade in, and we do have an example over on the door over there, and we'll get into barricade. But they lock the door, and they start applying the barricade kit. They then look at analyzing next steps, what they're going to do if they're putting desks up there, chairs, and things like that. Next. So here's an example of the barricade kit that's over on the door actually here, and then also what a picture of what we would be doing. We'd be using chairs, desks, and we're going right into barricade. Okay.
I want to talk a little bit more about barricade just because we practice this with our staff. So when we did our training for our staff, we not only did an hour and a half in the classroom where we talked about what Alice is, but then we did an hour and a half of simulations with staff. We were in their schools. We did it school by school. Arturo was my main man. He was my active threat in most every one that I did. And Arturo went through the hallway with an airsoft pistol, and we challenged our staff to do different Alice techniques. And one was to barricade. And it was interesting. A lot of times, the first time that a group of staff members would try to put a barricade together, they weren't always successful. You know, and Arturo or the other police officers would get into the room. By that second time, they knew what they were doing. And so what we would do is the first time we'd make them kind of wing it. You know, you got to look in the room, figure out what you can use. Second time we gave them some pointers. You know, and so some of the pointers we give are, you know, extension cords around door handles tied to something. We have a lot of teachers that have brought things in to support that. We have a lot of staff members that have put heavy things near doors so they can easily slide them over. One of the things that we do is we instruct our staff when we did the training, go back to your rooms. What can you use? If you're a first grade teacher, get your first grade counterparts, practice together. You know, make sure that you as an individual can do your barricade, because if you're a first grade teacher, you've got no help. You are a one-person show putting that barricade together, so make sure that you can do it. And so we have, I tell you, I have been to a lot of schools watching that we have some barricade studs, and you'll be surprised, you know, that it can be some of the smallest staff members we have, and you cannot get in those rooms. So I just wanted to add that little bit on barricade.
Hey, we also give each teacher gets a door jamb. So they are used for a door if the door swings in.
Correct.
We use that. Every teacher has one in the district as well.
And I think a lot of them have other things that they've brought in themselves, and we encourage it. Inform. So the I in Alice stands for inform. And you know, when Scott and Brian and I were talking, Inform was such a key part of why we liked Alice. There's other programs that are excellent. There's one called Run, Hide, Fight that's very popular. It's an excellent program. The thing that we loved about Alice was the Inform piece. And I guess for me, it came to when I went through my Alice training. My training was in Kettle Moraine Middle School. And the first simulation we do in Alice training with staff members is we do a lockdown, a passive lockdown. We make ourselves experience how we had done things for the previous 40 years. And I was sitting in a classroom with about 20 other people, and I knew that there was a active shooter, and he was a Waukesha County sheriff that was roaming through the hallways. I had no idea where he was. I had no idea if I was in a safe location to be just in lockdown, or if maybe I should evacuate. And as I was sitting in that room, I said, we've got to provide information. We've got kids and teachers in classrooms, and all they know is there's an alert. All they know is there's a threat in their building. We've got to somehow give them information. And I knew we had a lot of cameras. And so Couple things on Inform. This slide here just has a few things, which says, you know, we revisit calling 911. We certainly want to make sure that law enforcement knows everything we can possibly tell them. We want to tell them facts. We also want to tell the people in our school facts. There was a time in schools across the country that code words were used, you know, didn't want to scare the kids. You know, so, it's a cloudy day outside or some goofy thing like that, or Mr. Smith is in the building. Those were codes that school districts would use to tell people there was an active threat. Well, you know, we have substitute teachers. We have visitors in buildings. They don't know these codes. And in all reality, if that alert system goes out, we're all scared already. Learning a little bit more detail about things is not going to make us any more scared. You know, we're already scared. Teachers are scared, principals scared, students are scared. Facts, and that's something that the police, they emphasize. You got to give as much fact as possible. So we have over 2,000 cameras in our district. You know, it averages out to be about 50 a school. Some of these numbers here are a little bit on the low side now, but obviously the bigger the school, the more cameras. That's what those bullet points are for. This is just an example. These are 36 cameras from one elementary school just up on one screen. Our camera access is all over the place. So we have it locally at the school. We have 3 remote locations that we can pull up any camera in the district, within the district. We can pull them up on the cloud. I can pull them up. I can pull any camera up in the district on my phone right now. I'm not I better not say that because I'm terrible at technology, but a lot of other people can. They're really, you know, I can never overstate my technology lack of. But I have people who work in my department who are phenomenal, and they understand it really well. So we can get it off the cloud on phones or tablets or laptops. We also have, our law enforcement agencies all have access to all of our cameras. I don't know if everybody knows that, but our law enforcement agencies have access to our cameras, and some of them use them often and are really good at it, and others, we've got a safety meeting next week with, and I think we'll talk about that. If anybody feels uncomfortable about it, let's do a little bit more training. We have a lot of remote access to our cameras. And we have remote access to the intercoms at every school. And this gets back to that, I'm sitting in that little middle school classroom scared, even though I know it's fake, I'm still nervous. And I'm probably more nervous because I'm thinking about our schools, not me, And that's when we said, we got to do this. We got to be able to talk over the intercom system, the phone system at every school from a remote location. Yeah, we have cameras at the school. Yeah, they have access to the intercom, but they're going to be under high stress. Are they going to be able to look at all those cameras and provide, calm, reasonable information to the people in that building? And so what we do is we've got Kevin here. He's one of our examples, and that's his office, and those are a bunch of cameras of one building. He's not in the building. Yeah, he may be a little jazzed up because of what's going on, but he's certainly not in harm's way, and he can get on that intercom of that school and tell people what he sees. It's a single person. It's a male. He's wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt. He's, for example, if you're familiar with, say, Tremper High School, he's walking on the west side of the cafeteria towards the gymnasium. Everybody in Tremper High School can visualize exactly where that is. And then they can make some decisions about what they do. And one decision may be, we're going to move from that lockdown and barricade because, hey, he's over by the gym, and I'm way over on the north side of the school in a classroom. I may want to get out, And one thing, and I'll just talk about Arturo in a second here, or for a second. One of the things when we did our training, when we did our initial ALICE training in Unified, for our administrators, we invited law enforcement to that training, and we had a lot of KPD officers come, a lot of sheriff deputies come, and we trained them at the same time we were training ourselves. And one of the things that I remember vividly was, I would say every cop there said, I've already told my kids if there's a threat in their school, get the heck out. Well, absolutely, but with the caveat of get out if you know that it's a safe way to get out, and that's where we're going to go here with Brian.
So the C4 counter is the last resort, so that intruder has gotten into that room where the kids and the teacher is at. So we would like to use some different counters. It's been given that some people can and have survived contact with an armed intruder when we use counter techniques. So one of the counter strategies is to become less vulnerable. Instead of sitting in the corner, being a target, being more aggressive. So if confronted by an active shooter, instead of sitting still and being passive, we want to do some things that we think might take that shooter off guard. One of them is throwing things at him, whether it be a book, a stapler, whatever you can get your hands on, you're throwing it at him. Creating as much noise and distraction as possible, screaming, yelling, getting them off their game, why they came in there, causing mass chaos, havoc. Patrick brought up a fact that in Virginia Tech, that I believe it was Air Force, LaPointe went after the gentleman, but nobody else did. They stayed passive, and that was their chance to look at it. We want our kids to be very active and causing chaos, because it's a last resort, okay? I've had teachers ask me, well, Geiger, how do I go through a window? I say, you take a chair and you throw it through that window so you can get outside, because right now we're not worrying about a $100 or $200 window. We're caring about the safety of you and your kids.
Just hit it in the corner, not in the center. We cover that in Alabama.
Right.
We cover how to break a window.
The problem with counter, we really don't use this technique. We talk about it. We talk about it with the kids, but we don't, obviously, we don't practice throwing staplers and books and things like that. But we do discuss it with the students. All right, Patrick did talk a little bit about evacuate. So if the intruder, so we're getting informed about where that intruder is, whether it be in the school itself, on the intercom, or by down here. We want to look what's the best opportunity. Again, it's stop, look, listen. Make sure you're gathering that information so you can make a good authorized decision on the safety of your students. And the big thing is to make sure that you don't move from one safe area, if you're safe, to somewhere where you don't know if it's safe or not. Always stay in your safe area. Only 2% of violent intruders, out of all those shootings, only 2% usually have more than one shooter. It's typically 98% one shooter, okay? And then reunification versus rally point. I know Scott's going to touch this later on in the presentation, but when we're talking about our rally points are where our students are going to meet. So if a teacher gets the kids outside, we have designated areas we want them to go to hook up. And we do believe, I've talked to police officers and SROs, the police will meet us there. They will have police there to our rally points. They know where our rally points are. Obviously, we're not going to tell people in this presentation, but the kids and the staff know where they will be. And from there, we'll have a reunification where the buses will pick up the kids and take them over to reunification. And why wouldn't we want parents there? Because we really want to make sure we have the kids, we know who's missing or who's not missing, and then we can get over to reunification and get your son or daughter back to you safely. All right, so we're going to start talking about how we started training our staff and our students. So did you know that how many districts would you say in the state of Wisconsin have a fully adopted ALICE curriculum? There's just one, and that's Kenosha Unified. So you can see some of the training here. We started training in the summer of 2015 with KUSD administrative staff. We also brought in the police officers, SROs, and trained them with us. KUSD asked them to come with us. We then started training teachers and support staff, so everybody got trained. Bus drivers, kitchen staff, custodians, everybody was trained in ALICE. Thank you. What ALICE does is we talk about it really promotes empowerment, not fear. You're not hiding in a corner waiting. You're not helpless. You're making decisions, and that's what we want is good decision making. Uses appropriate language and grade specific, so we're not teaching high school material to elementary. We go with elementary, we teach them elementary. We then teach middle school a little different, and then high school, obviously, they can handle some different conversations. ALICE lessons are presented in very much the same way as a stranger danger, fire safety, tornado drills, and it leaves KSD better prepared to avoid casualties, we believe. What Alice lessons do not do is we do not physically attempt any evacuation unless we're authorized. So, and Scott will go into that, but we do a couple evacuations a year, one in the fall and one in the spring. We also do not climb out of windows. We don't break windows. And we don't do anything that increases anxiety into our students. We want to make sure that we're talking to them, making sure that they're comfortable, because we know that knowledge is then, it seeps in better when they're comfortable and feel safe and that they're learning instead of having anxieties. And then I could tell you there's a couple times at the high school we have had counselors talk to some of our kids that had anxieties about it and kind of work through those issues. Alice lessons do not show any audio or video of any shootings. We're not into that. We're not teaching children how to fight back. We'll go through those procedures. Obviously, at the elementary, we wouldn't talk about that unless you don't want to go into that too much because you don't want to heighten their anxiety. But then you want to present. We have not talked to short-term subs, so we don't let them teach the students. So if a sub teacher's out for the day, I know I've had when I worked at Tremper High School, we would bring the deans in, or we'd have the guidance counselors come in and they would teach it instead of a substitute teacher, because we believe that, we would know our students a lot better and how they would handle that information. All right, next I'm going to have Scott go into the lesson plans that KOC has created.
Thank you, Brian. I know you've gotten a lot of information and we're on the home stretch. We're going to go through these lessons in a little more detail. I just want to remind you, we do have note cards back there in case some of you came in late. Write your questions down. One of us will get back in touch with you. We're all parents. We all have a lot of the same questions you have. I'm going to try to give a little more detail on some of these lesson plans and provide hopefully some more clarity for you. Keep in mind that we're educators. We are not law enforcement. We are educators. So the lens that we come through really focuses on teaching and learning. And so, like Brian said and Pat referenced, when we talk to kids, it's not to get them ready for military action. We're trying to get them learning about a very unfortunate part of society these days. Our lessons, are 7 of them. And for those of you who are parents of children currently in Kenosha Unified School District, you've probably heard them talk about these already. The first 3 lessons are the meat and potatoes of what we do. Lesson 4 is a review, kind of pulling all that together. And then lesson 5 is our fall safety drill, which all of our students in Kenosha Unified did earlier this year. We do a winter review, which I'll explain in a little more detail later. And then we end, just recently we had our spring safety drill. That you should have all received communication on, and it went very, very well. The first lesson, and we all had a lot of anxiety going into this. We're very thankful to have a very supportive school district and all its entities to really take this forward. And we were all worried about how do you explain this information to children without making them more afraid than what they may be already. And so the first lesson really talks about the fact that we do a lot of drills. I remember talking about the analogy of, imagine when someone came up with the idea of having a fire drill. I imagine at some point that was a new idea, and someone said, we need to have a fire drill in our schools. And there were parents that probably, and staff members, like, I don't know if the kids can handle it. We're going to talk about a fire in the school. It's so scary. I don't know. I think they're emotionally ready to take it. Our kids are so much tougher than we give them credit for. And so Alice was kind of that same thing where we talked about this is information that our kids need to have and our staff needs to have. And we just have to keep on pushing that envelope. So it is very similar to fire, severe weather, tornado, lockdown. We used to do, like we talked about, these passive drills where we'd go into lockdown, we'd have to put the key, and imagine the adrenaline flowing, you're trying to get your key in the door, and you finally get it shut, and then you hide in the corner just praying that no one else comes in. And so we've come a long, long way. It does emphasize in that first lesson plan where Brian had mentioned that stop, look, and listen factor. There's a lot going on, but any of you that have been in an emotional situation, that adrenaline starts pumping, you got to slow things down, you got to stop, you got to look around, you got to listen for information, and then move as quickly as possible, but strategically. And that's what we're trying to teach through our ALICE lesson plans. The importance of remaining calm, gathering information, and ultimately making good, informed decisions. When we get into the second lesson plan, this is where we talk specifically about the barricade and counter. When it's initially taught to students, it is taught as a concept, what we will do, and then they gradually grow into where they actually practice in their room, but it's instructional. It's calm. It is not, if you have a picture in your mind of someone slamming the door shut and just start shoving stuff against, we don't do that, all right? We pray that we never have to do that. But what we do talk about is what items in the room are appropriate to barricade. We heard mention about the door wedge that can go in the bottom if your door opens in or if it opens out. The barricade kits that you can see on all the doors to this room. You know, it's scary to think that we would have to have our children do this, but by doing ALICE and teaching these lesson plans, your kids, if they're in Kenosha Unified, they should be able to have a conversation with you about how would you barricade that room. And if someone, you know, got into that room, what would you do to counter? Again, we don't teach them to fight. We're not a martial arts academy. We're not training people to do that. But sitting and waiting for something bad to happen to you is not a good option either. And so we do very specifically stick within board-adopted curriculum that focuses on specific counter activities. And they're taught in a calm instructional way. Talked about the barricade kit, always a reminder, you know, it's amazing when you're in a situation you forget to call 911. It's like one of the most important pieces, so we have to really make sure we're teaching that, staying away from the door and then using those counter strategies. The third lesson is where you get into evacuation and you know, very difficult decisions that have to get made, and I just want to emphasize ALICE is not linear. You've heard that a couple of times tonight. It does not first do the A, then the L, then the I, then the C, then the E. It is about giving strategic options. And so if you decide to evacuate as a teacher or that group of students does, you know, we want to make sure we're ready for that. What are the possible exits from that classroom that you can utilize? Multiple doors. We have so many different classrooms. Pat can talk about different buildings and multiple exits and entrances from certain rooms, and some have windows, some do not. And so they have to be prepared to, if you're in that room, how do you get out safely if you choose to do that? We know that barricading and countering is our first option. We want to make sure the kids are secure. But if we do end up evacuating, you know, like I said, how do we do that? Here's the rule, and you heard Brian say it, and we emphasize this, big bold letters. Never move from a safe position to an unsafe position. If you are safe, no need to get into harm's way. Stay where you are safe. But if you're not safe and you can move to another area, do so. And we talk about what are the best ways to do that. And where do you end up going? And these are the three key vocabulary pieces, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions that you'll have in your minds on this, because I know I did when we were going through writing the curriculum and answering questions in all the listening sessions that we did. The first step is if you get out. I don't want anybody leaving here saying we're telling kids to get out, because that's an option. If they choose to get out and evacuate, we want them to go anywhere it's safe. We don't want to tell them to go to one specific area. We don't want to program that. Even in our fire drills, you know, we get so into the regular monotony of hear the fire drill, go out the room, go out the same exit all the time. Well, what if that door is you can't exit out of it? You're going to stand there and just look at the fire? You're going to have to think. You're going to have to make some decisions. So get to a safe place. It might be a neighbor's yard. It may be a grocery store. It might be Family Dollar. It might be anywhere around that building, but get to somewhere safe. And ultimately, the students are taught to get to their pre-identified rally point. Every school has a rally point. It's one specific location that we've already talked to, the owner of that place or where this is, and that location is prepared to receive students at a moment's notice. And that is where we get together with students and staff, and we talk about what are our needs. Are we safe? Law enforcement will go there. We will get class lists together, make sure everyone's accounted for. And then once that's taken place, then we go over to the reunification site. And for almost all buildings, that's Mahone or Indian Trail. For almost all buildings, that's Mahoney Indian Trail. So what we do is typically, and we've had a couple of situations in our district where we've had to evacuate a school, and a message will get sent out from our communications department and say, hey, just so you know, the following school or your child's school or this is going on at 1 p.m. Students will all be at Mahone Middle School. You can get them, and we send, the district responds, as you heard Pat say, the food service, our technology, our leadership, facilities. Everybody is going to go into action to make sure that if students haven't been, if they miss lunch, we want to make sure they get a meal. If they need their insulin or whatever, whatever the needs come into play, we want to make sure that those get addressed. And that's where you'll be able to pick up your loved one. And so that's the key differences between those. Like you heard earlier, we do not disclose rally points. I've been, as a principal, in situations where we've had to go through some of this, and as a parent, your gut instinct is to get to the school, get your child. You got to know that law enforcement will be everywhere. You won't be able to get in. It'll be so chaotic. And so we will communicate with you. Our goal is to get those children home to you safely, and this plan has proven time and time again to be as successful as anything we've had so far. When we get to lesson 4, it's a review. It's just a recap of 1, 2, and 3. We go through what ALICE is, and you've seen this acronym. And then we get to 5. This happens in the fall, and so this is where we put our concepts into practice. We focus that, we plead to staff, we tell principals, we train them. This is a calm instructional focus. We do not, our intent is not to produce anxiety here. We know that just in itself, it's an anxious event. But we're not trying to scare. You're not going to have the biggest 5th grader in the classroom put out in the hallway and say, see if you can get through our barricade. Not doing that. All right, that's not the focus or intent of these lesson plans. Our focus is to avoid any role playing, and we do make sure parents are aware. Hopefully, for those of you that are parents here with us tonight, you received a communication saying that our ALICE safety drill is coming up, and then after it happened, you should have received a communication that night. Okay, that is the expectation of our district, so that you do stay informed with that. We did create lesson plan 6 because, at the elementary, the kids pretty much stay where they are all year. We make sure that they're prepared in case they're in art or music or FIAD or in the cafeteria. We talk about those concepts. However, at the middle school and high school, especially at the high school level, you have students that switch schedules, end up being in different areas. Teachers end up being with different students. We have new kids that are new to the district. We have new staff to the district. So lesson 6 happens mid-year, and we try to capture and review all those key components of ALICE so everyone is prepared as possible should anything happen. And then, like I spoke to about earlier, this just happened last week, I guess it was. And you should have received notification that we were doing our spring ALICE safety drill. All the schools completed them without a glitch. So proud of them. Did a great job, and you should have received notification that did occur. And that will be the expectation for all of the drills happening forward. So our students have actually done this. We started them the last half of the year before, and then this whole first year, this is our first full year of implementation with these curriculum pieces. We just wanted to kind of leave you with something here tonight as you sit here and hear all this information. Here are some of the warning signs, and these aren't things I made up. These are from documented sources, from hospitals or law enforcement agencies. What are some things to look for? We all know that we have gut feelings when it comes to seeing something that doesn't feel right. And unfortunately, sometimes when we see those things, we're too shy to speak up. I mean, we have heard over and over again in the media about situations where people come forward and say, I knew something was wrong, and they should have said something. So these are some things that you can kind of take with you. We know we talk all the time about children that are picked on, that are bullied. We talk about seeing kids that are withdrawn, feeling rejected all the time. expressing violence in drawings. You heard Pat talk about at the Virginia Tech case where the kid actually gave a speech or wrote a paper that scared people enough to drop the course. Those are some huge red flags that it sounds really obvious that people would say something, but it continues to happen over and over again where people don't. And so these are some of the warning signs. Continued kids that are cruel to their pets, prejudice, intolerance, gang membership. A lot of research is coming out on violent media, video games, and the constant exposure to these activities. This is put out by the U.S. Department of Education. And so it gives you as a parent a lot to think about when it comes to, kind of what's causing this. So, what can you do? Well, here's a couple of things. There's a list of 1,000 things that I could spend the next 3 hours talking about, but I just tried to capture a few things. Maintain and encourage others to maintain a supportive, loving relationship with your child. Building your child's self-esteem, make them feel good about themselves, help them process through when they don't understand things or if you see them frustrated. Setting limits, how many times are you out there and kids are hitting and name calling and it's not addressed? We just need to make sure that we're modeling appropriate behavior for our little ones as they're watching us. Imitation's a huge strategy for kids and how they learn. Setting examples, limit children's access to media violence, including television and video games, and teaching tolerance of other people. There's so many things to improve in our world and avoid discrimination, those prejudices that occur out there, because they don't lead anywhere good, and it does cause some problems. Most importantly, be aware of what's going on around you. Talk to your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews. When you have conversations and you hear them say something, ask them to tell you more about that and help them process through. If there's something that doesn't feel right, you hear something, see something, say something. We got to report these events, and we all know, we've seen in the paper that we're getting more and more reports about these things, so I think we're making strides in that area. They're hard to deal with. We do our very best, but we do need to have that information, because when we don't get it, I think that's way more uncomfortable and way more devastating. I appreciate you coming out here tonight. I know you have questions. I know there are heavy thoughts on your mind, and I know you're going to leave here tonight wanting maybe even a couple more hours of not listening to us, but maybe talking to us. Tonight was for us to inform you about what we're doing here in Kenosha Unified School District. We certainly, on behalf of Pat and Brian, we hope that you got a lot of good information here tonight. I promise you, if you leave your comment or question on a card and put your name on it, email address, phone number, whatever you prefer, spell it right, put all the right numbers down, we will get in contact with you. Some of us will be around for a little bit if you have individual questions, but if you could please fill out those note cards, that would be great. Also, Arturo is here. We appreciate him coming tonight, and maybe can give you a law enforcement perspective on things as well. So thank you all for coming out here tonight. Appreciate it, and have a great evening. Just also a quick note, we do have 2 other community nights coming up.